Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the fascinating life of a ruler so rich and generous that he's still talked about 700 years later. Mansa Musa, the king of Mali. Picture this, a vast kingdom in West Africa, sparkling with gold, where salt was so valuable it was literally traded ounce for ounce with gold. And our main character, Musa, starts off with surprisingly humble beginnings before becoming arguably the wealthiest person in history. But spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this journey without dozing off at least once. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments, because hey, it's always fun to know who's drifting off with me tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Mansa Musa was born around 1280 into the Keita clan, part of the Malinke people, who lived in what we now call West Africa. The Mali Empire wasn't just a tiny kingdom, it was a sprawling territory rich with resources, but it was also a place with lots of small kingdoms and rival tribes. Musa wasn't born into the royal throne, at least not directly. He inherited his position after the death of the previous emperor, Abu Bakr II, who famously vanished on an expedition across the Atlantic Ocean, or at least, that's one version historians still argue about. Young Musa's early life is mostly a mystery, but we know he rose to power by proving himself a skilled leader and loyal deputy. Mali was well known for its incredible wealth, especially in gold. In fact, Mali controlled some of the richest gold mines on the planet at the time. The kingdom's economy thrived because of two key resources: gold, which was prized everywhere, and salt, essential for preserving food in hot climates and even traded like currency. Remember that time you forgot salt in your kitchen? Back then, it was a luxury almost as precious as gold itself. Mali's rulers collected taxes from traders who crossed the empire, boosting their riches even more. Musa's rise to power happened in this golden context. But it wasn't just about money. He had to manage rival groups, tribal politics, and keep the peace in a kingdom stretching from the Sahara Desert down to the forests of Guinea. This required savvy leadership. He wasn't just a rich guy sitting on piles of gold. One quirky thing about Musa's early rule was his reportedly massive entourage. When he traveled, he didn't just take a few guards. His caravans could include thousands of people: soldiers, servants, traders, even entertainers. It was like the ancient version of a rock star tour, but with camels instead of tour buses. Historians still argue whether Musa's early policies focused more on expanding Mali through warfare or diplomacy. Some suggest he spent decades strengthening alliances, while others think he used military campaigns to crush rivals. Either way, his rule set the stage for Mali to become a legendary empire of wealth and culture, with Musa at its helm. So that's the beginning of Mansa Musa's life. A story starting with humble roots in a land of gold and salt, rising to power through a mix of leadership, strategy, and a bit of luck. You might think this is just about gold and riches, but the story only gets deeper, with religion, culture, and incredible journeys that change the world's view of Africa forever. We'll get into all that next, but for now, just picture this young king stepping onto the world stage, unaware he's about to become history's richest man. Mali's wealth wasn't some accidental jackpot, it was the product of geography, resources, and clever trade networks that stretched across continents. At the heart of it all were two seemingly simple commodities: gold and salt. But back then, these weren't just things to buy chips or season your dinner. They were the lifeblood of economies, social status symbols, and crucial for survival. Gold in Mali was everywhere, or at least in many parts of the empire. The kingdom controlled massive gold mines, particularly in regions like Bambouk and Berea, which produced more gold than anywhere else in the world at that time. Imagine fields and hills buzzing with miners digging out tiny flakes and nuggets, carried in woven baskets, then melted down into bars. Gold wasn't just shiny bling, it was the standard for trade, diplomacy, and even religious offerings. People carried it around as a kind of wealth passport. Salt was equally vital, but for very practical reasons. Without salt, food spoils quickly, especially in hot climates where refrigeration is not an option. Traders sourced salt from the Sahara Desert, particularly from salt mines around Tagaza and Taberdeni, where massive slabs of salt were carved out and transported on camel caravans. across the desert. Salt was literally life-sustaining. It preserved meat and fish, and kept people healthy. Mali's control over salt mines gave it power in the region that sometimes rivaled its gold wealth. One interesting side note is that salt was often called white gold. It was so valuable that it was traded ounce for ounce, with gold itself in some places. So while gold dazzled the world's elite, salt quietly kept societies functioning. It's funny how the stuff we sprinkle on fries today was once worth more than gold. Traders and merchants traveled vast distances bringing goods to and from Mali. The kingdom sat at a crossroads of trade routes connecting the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and sub-Saharan Africa. Caravans would cross the harsh Sahara Desert, braving sandstorms and thirst, carrying gold, salt, ivory, cola nuts, and even slaves. This trade network was sophisticated and well organized, with markets bustling in cities like Timbuktu and Gao. The Malian economy thrived on this system of trade and tribute. Local rulers collected taxes and tolls from passing caravans, boosting the empire's wealth. Gold coins minted in Mali became recognizable currency, showing the empire's growing influence. Interestingly, historians still argue whether Mali's gold was primarily used internally or largely exported to Europe and the Islamic world. Some think much of it stayed within Africa, fueling local economies, while others believe it flooded global markets. The wealth from gold and salt also allowed Mali to support a standing army and lavish palaces. This attracted scholars, artists, and craftsmen from across the known world. It's worth noting that Mali's gold wasn't just dug up randomly. It was carefully managed and sometimes even hoarded to avoid flooding the market and dropping prices. Here's a quirky fact. The importance of salt wasn't just economic. Some Malian rulers used salt blocks as status symbols or even currency for special ceremonies. It's hard to imagine paying your taxes in big chunks of salt, but that was reality. In sum, Mali's wealth was no accident. It was the result of strategic control over gold and salt resources, connected by trade networks that reached far beyond Africa's borders. This foundation made Musa's reign not just about personal wealth, but about managing one of the richest economies of the medieval world. So next time you reach for the salt shaker, think of those vast caravans crossing deserts, hauling white gold to keep an empire thriving, and remember that this simple mineral helped build one of the greatest African kingdoms in history. Mansa Musa's ascent wasn't just a personal triumph, it was the story of an empire in motion. Mali, already rich, was about to become a powerhouse. Once Musa was crowned, his first challenge was to consolidate control over a sprawling territory, which wasn't easy when you're dealing with diverse peoples, languages, and distant lands. Mali's size stretched from the edge of the Sahara Desert in the north to dense forests in the south, including important cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné. The empire was like a patchwork quilt of different cultures and tribes, all needing some kind of central leadership to keep things from unraveling. Musa's strategy combined military might and diplomacy. He was not just a gold-hoarding king, he was a shrewd politician who understood that expanding Mali's borders required careful balance. Some regions joined willingly, attracted by Mali's protection and economic opportunities, while others resisted fiercely. He deployed armies to suppress rebellions or fend off external threats, but also forged alliances through marriage and negotiation. This mix of hard and soft power helped Mali stabilize and grow. An interesting tidbit here is that Musa reportedly controlled the famous salt mines of Tagazé by force, an important prize because salt was just as crucial as gold. This control helped him dominate the trans-Saharan trade routes. Think of it like controlling the main highway of commerce. Whoever held that power could tax goods, influence merchants, and boost their own wealth. Musa also standardized the collection of taxes and tribute from conquered territories. These revenues filled Mali's coffers, allowing the king to fund ambitious projects, armies, and festivals. His government was surprisingly sophisticated, with appointed officials overseeing various parts of the empire, from tax collection to justice. Yet historians still argue whether Mali's expansion was driven more by military conquest or economic incentives. Some evidence points to prolonged warfare to bring rival kingdoms under control, while other scholars suggest that trade and wealth were enough to convince many to join peacefully. A quirky detail. Some accounts say Musa carried a staff topped with a gold nugget on official occasions. It was like a royal scepter, but literally shining with the wealth of the empire, a flashy reminder of Mali's power. And that image stuck in the minds of people across the Mediterranean world. By the time Musa was done consolidating power, Mali had transformed from a wealthy kingdom into a vast empire, with influence rivaling famous medieval states like Egypt and Spain. The population was diverse, the cities vibrant, and the gold flowing. His reign also brought relative peace within the empire's borders, which encouraged trade and cultural exchange. This stability made Mali a beacon for scholars, traders, and artists, setting the stage for an era of flourishing culture and knowledge. So Musa's consolidation wasn't just about growing the empire's size, but also building the structures, political, military, and economic, that would support its incredible wealth and influence for decades. He wasn't just the richest man alive, he was a ruler, laying the groundwork for Mali's golden age. Mansa Musa's rule wasn't only about gold and expanding territory, religion played a huge role too. He was a devout Muslim, and his faith deeply influenced his policies, diplomacy, and even how he was perceived by other rulers. Mali's conversion to Islam wasn't overnight, it was a gradual process, but by Musa's time, it had become central to the empire's identity. Islam brought a new framework for governance, justice, and international relations that aligned Mali with other Muslim states. When Musa took the throne, he made it a priority to strengthen Islamic institutions across Mali. He built mosques and schools and encouraged scholars and clerics to settle in Mali. This was a big deal because it helped unify the diverse peoples of Mali under a common religious and cultural umbrella. It also allowed Mali to tap into the vast networks of the Islamic world, from Cairo to Mecca, boosting trade and diplomacy. Now, here's a quirky but fascinating tidbit. Musa reportedly insisted on wearing traditional West African robes during his pilgrimage to Mecca, blending his cultural identity with Islamic faith. This showed that adopting Islam didn't mean erasing local traditions, but rather mixing them in unique ways. Historians still argue whether this syncretism helped or complicated Mali's political stability. Was it a clever fusion or a source of tension? Musa's Islamic faith also influenced his legal system. Islamic law, or Sharia, began to shape how justice was administered in Mali. Complementing existing traditional laws, this legal blend was practical. It allowed local customs to coexist with Islamic principles, creating a flexible system that worked for a multi-ethnic empire. Religion also shaped diplomacy. Musa's status as a devout Muslim gained him respect from powerful Islamic states, helping Mali forge alliances and engage in cultural exchange. It was like a medieval VIP pass to the broader Muslim world. But not everyone was on board. Some local leaders and communities resisted the spread of Islam, preferring their traditional beliefs and customs. This created ongoing tensions in certain regions, a delicate balancing act for Musa's government. Historians still debate how deeply Islam penetrated rural areas versus urban centers during his reign. Importantly, Musa's religious devotion wasn't just political posturing. His pilgrimage to Mecca was a spiritual journey, showing his commitment to the faith and setting an example for his subjects. This pilgrimage, which we'll dive into next, became legendary worldwide, marking Mali on the global map. So, religion under Musa was a dynamic force, uniting, shaping, and sometimes challenging the empire. It gave Mali a powerful identity and connected it to one of the largest cultural and religious communities in the world. With all the benefits and complications that entailed, Mansa Musa's pilgrimage to Mecca in 1324 is the stuff of legends. It was more than just a religious journey, it was a spectacle that sent ripples across continents and changed how the world saw Mali. Imagine thousands of people, camels laden with gold, crossing deserts and cities, their footsteps leaving a glittering trail. This pilgrimage was like the medieval equivalent of a celebrity world tour, but with way more sand and a lot more gold. The pilgrimage, or Hajj, is one of the 5 pillars of Islam. Basically, it's a mandatory journey to Mecca, if you can afford it and are physically able. For Musa, this trip was a demonstration of faith, power, and wealth. He traveled with an entourage, reportedly numbering in the tens of thousands soldiers, servants, priests, and traders. His caravan was said to include over 60,000 people and 80 to 100 camels, each carrying hundreds of pounds of gold. The sheer scale was mind-boggling. One quirky detail: some accounts say Musa gave away so much gold along the way that he unintentionally caused inflation in cities he passed through, making gold temporarily less valuable. It's like if someone decided to give away stacks of $100 bills on a street corner, you'd suddenly find cash everywhere and prices might spike. Historians still argue about how much of an economic impact this actually had, but the story stuck. Musa's pilgrimage put Mali on the map in the eyes of the Islamic world and Europe. Before his journey, Mali was mostly unknown outside Africa, but his arrival in Cairo and Mecca caused a sensation. His generosity and wealth dazzled the people he met, with tales spreading about the richest man on earth crossing the desert. For many, this was the first time they'd heard of West Africa as a place of immense riches. The pilgrimage wasn't just about showing off wealth. Musa's trip also had diplomatic and educational goals. He met with scholars and rulers, bringing back Islamic knowledge, books and ideas to Mali. This helped to transform Mali into a center of learning and culture, not just trade and riches. Some scholars debate whether Musa's pilgrimage was primarily religious or a strategic display of power. It's probably a bit of both. Faith was genuine, but the journey also sent a clear message to other rulers about Mali's might. An interesting image: Musa's arrival in Cairo reportedly caused a spectacle where the streets were lined with people eager to catch a glimpse of the Golden King. Some say he built schools and mosques in the cities along his route, leaving a lasting impression beyond his generosity. So, Musa's pilgrimage wasn't just a walk in the desert. It was a transformative journey that showed the world the wealth and sophistication of Mali and helped weave the empire into the broader Islamic world. This journey would become the defining moment of his reign and one of the most famous episodes in African history. The logistics behind Mansa Musa's pilgrimage caravan were nothing short of astounding. Imagine organizing a traveling city in the 14th century, thousands of people, dozens of camels, horses and donkeys, all carrying gold, food, water, and gifts. The caravan reportedly stretched for miles across the desert, a moving testament to Mali's wealth and Musa's power. It's the kind of event that would make modern festival organizers weep with envy, or maybe just utter a quiet "how on earth." Each camel was said to carry around 300 pounds of gold dust or coins. That's a lot of bling, even by today's standards. The caravan included soldiers for protection, servants to tend to the animals, and travelers, religious leaders, and plenty of traders. Managing food and water was a massive challenge, especially crossing the harsh Sahara Desert, where temperatures soar and resources are scarce. Musa's entourage had to plan carefully, relying on known oases and trading posts along the way. Now here's a quirky twist. Some historians speculate that Musa's caravan included entertainers, musicians, dancers, even acrobats, to keep spirits high on such a long, grueling journey. It's like bringing your own festival on the road, medieval style. The caravan's generous distribution of gold created an economic ripple effect wherever it went. Musa is said to have handed out gold so lavishly in Cairo and Mecca that the value of gold dropped dramatically in those markets for over a decade. Prices soared, inflation hit, and the economy struggled to adjust. Imagine a massive windfall flooding the market, then sending prices on a roller coaster ride for years. Economists still debate the scale and duration of this effect. Interestingly, Musa's generosity was not just random giving. He gifted gold to rulers, traders, and ordinary people alike, cementing diplomatic ties and spreading Mali's influence far beyond its borders. These gifts were political tools, as much as acts of kindness. Historians also debate whether this gold flood had a longer-term impact on European economies. Some argue that Mali's gold indirectly helped fuel European economic expansion centuries later by increasing the overall supply of precious metals, while others think its effects were mostly local and temporary. One odd but telling fact: in some cities, the gold Musa distributed was reportedly so abundant that it was used to pay for construction and even charity, but locals feared that the sudden wealth was unsustainable. Managing such a caravan was an impressive feat of planning, logistics, and leadership. It showed not just Musa's wealth, but his ability to coordinate a massive, complex enterprise across thousands of miles in a harsh environment. So, Musa's pilgrimage caravan was more than a religious procession. It was a mobile economic force and a diplomatic mission, reshaping perceptions of Mali and demonstrating how wealth and faith could move together across the world's largest desert. Mansa Musa's pilgrimage didn't just move gold across deserts, it also carried culture, ideas, and knowledge. As the caravan trailed across Africa and into the Middle East, it became a moving crossroads where traders, scholars, and travelers mingled. This journey spread not only Mali's wealth but also its culture and Islamic learning far beyond the empire's borders. One fascinating aspect was how Musa's pilgrimage created a kind of cultural exchange. As he passed through cities like Cairo, Mecca, and Medina, Mali's representatives traded stories, ideas, and customs with people from across the Islamic world. This helped spread Mali's reputation as a wealthy and sophisticated kingdom. Imagine a medieval networking event, but instead of LinkedIn profiles, people exchanged manuscripts, poetry, and news of distant lands. This exchange wasn't one way. Musa returned to Mali with scholars, architects, and religious leaders, bringing back books and ideas that helped transform cities like Timbuktu into centers of Islamic education. Mali became a beacon for learning in West Africa, attracting students from across the region and beyond. A quirky detail: some travelers described how Malians introduced local West African music and storytelling traditions to the Middle East during the pilgrimage. Historians still argue whether these cultural influences significantly impacted Islamic art and music, or were just passing curiosities. Musa's journey also enhanced Mali's diplomatic standing. He established ties with other Muslim rulers, helping Mali gain respect and political influence. This diplomacy paved the way for trade agreements and scholarly exchanges that enriched Mali's culture and economy. The pilgrimage helped blend Islamic culture with local African traditions in unique ways. Mali didn't just import foreign ideas, it adapted and reshaped them. This cultural fusion made Mali cities vibrant hubs of diversity and learning. Interestingly, some manuscripts from this period show a mix of Arabic script with local African languages, demonstrating the melding of cultures. These documents are prized treasures today, showing how Musa's pilgrimage had lasting effects beyond wealth. So Musa's journey wasn't just a physical trek, it was a bridge connecting Mali to the wider world, spreading culture, faith, and knowledge in ways that reshaped the empire and its neighbors for generations. Word count awaiting continue. 4.1 million. You said. ChatGPT said. Section. Back home in Mali, the effects of Mansa Musa's pilgrimage rippled through the very bricks and mortar of the empire. He didn't just return with stories and scholars, he brought a grand vision for transforming Mali's cities into centers of culture, learning, and religious devotion. This vision led to an architectural boom that reshaped the urban landscape, especially in cities like Timbuktu, Gao, and Djenné. Musa commissioned the construction of grand mosques and madrasas, Islamic schools, including the famous Jingweba Mosque in Timbuktu. These buildings weren't just places of worship, they were symbols of Mali's power, wealth, and piety. Built from mud bricks and timber, their unique Sudano-Sahelian style combined local materials with Islamic architectural features, creating a look that's still iconic today. One quirky detail is that many of these structures required constant maintenance because the mud bricks erode with the rain. So communities hold annual festivals where everyone comes together to replaster the walls. A tradition that's as much about culture and social bonds as it is about preservation. Historians still argue how much of the architectural inspiration came directly from the Middle East versus local innovation, blending Islamic and African styles. Mansa Musa's investment in architecture wasn't just about impressing visitors or glorifying himself. These buildings served as hubs for education, law, and community gatherings, supporting the empire's social and political stability. The mosques doubled as courts and schools, where scholars debated theology, law, and science. This architectural focus reflected Musa's commitment to Islam and education, but also symbolized Mali's emergence as a sophisticated and cosmopolitan empire. His building projects helped to anchor Islamic culture in the region, blending it with local traditions and creating a distinctive West African Islamic identity. An interesting tidbit: some reports say Musa's architects incorporated gold dust into the plaster for ceremonial buildings. Talk about literally building wealth into your walls. Whether that's true or a bit of royal legend, it captures how deeply intertwined Mali's prosperity was with its cultural and religious life. By the end of Musa's reign, Mali's cities had transformed from regional trading posts into vibrant metropolises known throughout the Islamic world. These urban centers drew scholars, traders, and pilgrims, becoming magnets for intellectual and cultural activity. So Mansa Musa's architectural legacy wasn't just about stone and mud, it was a living expression of Mali's wealth, faith, and vision, a legacy that continues to inspire awe and admiration centuries later. Mali's architectural grandeur went hand in hand with its rise as a beacon of scholarship and learning, especially under Mansa Musa's patronage. The empire wasn't just about gold and grand buildings, it became a center where scholars gathered to study, debate, and write, turning Mali into a medieval intellectual hub. The city of Timbuktu, in particular, blossomed into a renowned center of Islamic education. Scholars came from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe to study subjects ranging from theology and law to astronomy and mathematics. The city hosted madras, which were institutions for higher learning, much like universities today. One of the most famous was the Sankore University, where students studied ancient manuscripts and engaged in spirited discussions. A quirky and fascinating detail, Timbuktu's libraries reportedly housed tens of thousands of manuscripts written on parchment and paper, some so delicate they had to be stored carefully in locked boxes to protect them from humidity and insects. Historians still argue about how many manuscripts survived and what they reveal about the intellectual life of medieval Mali. But it's clear these texts covered a wide array of subjects, including medicine, history, and poetry. Mansa Musa's support of scholars wasn't just for prestige. He believed knowledge was a key to governance and religious understanding. By attracting scholars, he ensured that Mali's rulers and officials were well educated and that Islamic law was practiced properly. This helped maintain order in a vast and diverse empire. The influx of scholars also led to important cultural exchanges. Manuscripts from Mali spread across the Islamic world, and scholars brought back ideas that enriched local knowledge. This exchange helped preserve many ancient texts that might have been lost otherwise. Interestingly, some of these manuscripts have resurfaced in modern times, challenging old stereotypes about Africa as uncivilized. They show a sophisticated society deeply engaged with global knowledge centuries ago. One open question historians debate: to what extent did Mali's intellectual culture influence European Renaissance thinkers? Some suggest there may have been indirect links via Mediterranean trade routes, but it remains speculative. What's certain is that under Musa's reign, Mali was much more than a gold-rich kingdom. It was a vibrant intellectual powerhouse, where learning was a treasure rivaling any amount of gold. Mansa Musa's dazzling generosity wasn't without its consequences. When he handed out gold so freely during his pilgrimage and afterward, it caused one of the earliest known cases of inflation, a rapid increase in prices caused by an oversupply of money. It's like if someone suddenly decided to flood the market with a product, making it less valuable just because there's too much of it. When Musa passed through cities like Cairo, the massive influx of gold he distributed caused the value of gold to drop for over a decade. Prices for everyday goods soared because people needed more money to buy the same things. It's a bit like a sudden celebrity dropping thousands of dollars in a small town, which sounds fun but can seriously disrupt the local economy. Historians still argue about the full extent and duration of this economic ripple, but everyone agrees it was significant. Locally in Mali, the inflation affected trade, while Musa's generosity boosted Mali's prestige. Some merchants worried that flooding markets with gold would devalue their wealth and create instability. Imagine working hard to mine gold only to see its price drop because someone else gave it away like candy. Interestingly, some scholars think this event was one of the first recorded examples of how large-scale wealth redistribution can have unintended economic consequences. It's a medieval cautionary tale that echoes in modern economics today. Despite the inflation, Mali's economy remained strong due to its control over gold and salt production. The empire adjusted by managing gold supplies carefully after the pilgrimage to stabilize prices. Musa's successors learned to avoid such sudden outflows of gold. One quirky fact is that some reports say Musa's gold giveaways included not just coins, but also gold-dusted clothing and jewelry, spreading wealth through both money and luxury goods. That might have cushioned the economic shock somewhat. This episode shows the delicate balance between generosity and economic stability, a lesson for kings and governments through the ages. Musa's wealth was enormous, but spending it all at once proved tricky, even for the richest man alive. So while his gold dazzled the world, it also reminded everyone that money has to be managed wisely, or it risks losing its power and value. Something that's just as true today as it was 7 centuries ago. Running an empire as vast and diverse as Mali required more than just riches. It demanded a solid system of governance and justice to keep everything from falling apart. Mansa Musa knew this well, and his administration reflected a balance between centralized power and local autonomy. At the top was Musa himself, the emperor, or Mansa, who held ultimate authority over political, military, and religious matters. But ruling directly over such a huge area was impossible, so he appointed governors called farbas to manage different provinces. These officials collected taxes, maintained order, and ensured that laws were followed. It was like a medieval version of a federal government, with regional states. The tax system was essential for funding the empire's needs, from armies to public works. Taxes were collected in gold, salt, and other goods, often adjusted depending on the region's wealth and resources. Musa's officials were expected to be fair but firm, and corruption was reportedly kept in check through strict enforcement and the emperor's direct oversight. Justice in Mali combined Islamic law with traditional customs. Courts handled criminal and civil cases, with judges knowledgeable in both legal systems. This hybrid approach helped Mali accommodate its diverse population, respecting local traditions, while applying Islamic principles. Some historians debate how smoothly this legal duality worked, but it likely required constant negotiation and adaptation. A quirky detail, it's said that in some cases, trials could be held outdoors in public squares, allowing community members to witness proceedings, sort of like a medieval reality show, but with fewer dramatic confessions and more emphasis on fairness. Musa's reign also emphasized the importance of peace and security. The empire maintained a standing army to protect trade routes from bandits and external threats. This military presence helped create the stability necessary for Mali's economy and culture to flourish. Interestingly, some historians suggest that Musa's governance style influenced later West African states, setting standards for administration and law that persisted long after Mali's decline. So Mali under Mansa Musa wasn't just a kingdom of wealth, it was a well-organized empire with a system of governance designed to manage complexity, maintain justice, and support prosperity, no small feat for any ruler, then or now. Behind every great king there are often powerful queens and Mansa Musas. Mali was no exception. Royal women, sometimes overlooked in history books, played crucial roles in the empire's political and social life, shaping decisions from behind the scenes. Mali's queens, or Manses, were not just ornamental figures. Some served as advisors to the king, wielding significant influence over policy and court affairs. They managed estates, oversaw trade, and even acted as diplomats. Think of them as the original power players, quietly running parts of the empire, while Musa handled the throne. One quirky detail, there's an intriguing story of a queen who reportedly managed gold mines, giving her direct control over some of Mali's most valuable resources. This unusual role challenges the stereotype that medieval African royal women were passive or invisible. Historians still argue about the extent of women's power in Mali, but evidence suggests they were much more than bystanders. Royal marriages were strategic, cementing alliances between clans and neighboring kingdoms. These unions helped maintain peace and strengthen Mali's political network. Some queens came from influential families outside Mali, bringing new connections and ideas. The palace itself was a hub of female activity, with women managing everything from ceremonial events to religious rituals. Their presence was woven into the fabric of court life, influencing culture and governance. Interestingly, some oral traditions praise the wisdom and leadership of Mali's queens, hinting at a society that valued female authority in certain spheres. This contrasts with many contemporary medieval societies where women's political roles were severely limited. Despite their power, queens operated in a male-dominated hierarchy, often working subtly rather than overtly. This indirect influence makes tracing their exact impact tricky, but it's clear they shaped the empire's history in significant ways. So, Mali's royal women were essential players in the empire's story, managing wealth, forging alliances, and supporting Musa's reign. They remind us that behind the glittering gold and grand palaces, there were dynamic individuals whose roles deserve more attention. Mali, under Mansa Musa, was a place where two worlds often met and sometimes clashed. The Islamic faith Musa embraced in the traditional African customs that had shaped the region for centuries. This dynamic created a fascinating tension, one that influenced politics, culture, and daily life. Islam brought new laws, social practices, and religious rituals. It emphasized monotheism, prayer, charity, and pilgrimage, reshaping how people thought about the world and their place in it. For Musa, Islam was not only a personal faith, but also a tool to unify his vast empire under a common set of principles. Yet, many communities within Mali held tightly to their ancestral traditions, including beliefs in spirits, ancestor worship, and local rituals. These customs were deeply woven into daily life, from farming to festivals. For many, blending the old with the new wasn't a contradiction, but a way to maintain identity while embracing change. Historians still argue how Mali managed this balancing act. Some believe Islamic law Sharia was enforced strictly, while others suggest a more flexible approach allowed traditional practices to coexist. It's likely the truth lies somewhere in between, with different regions adapting in their own ways. A quirky example: in some areas, traditional healers worked alongside Islamic scholars, combining herbal remedies with religious prayers. This syncretism shows how people creatively integrated two belief systems to address life's challenges. Musa himself seemed to respect this blend. While he promoted Islam and built mosques, he didn't aggressively suppress local customs. This pragmatism helped maintain social harmony and prevented alienation of powerful local groups. Tensions did arise, especially where Islamic reformers pushed for stricter adherence. Some oral histories speak of conflicts between Islamic judges and traditional leaders, but these conflicts were often negotiated through compromise rather than outright confrontation. This religious dynamic also influenced Mali's culture. Music, art, and storytelling reflected both Islamic themes and indigenous motifs, creating a rich tapestry of expression unique to West Africa. So the tension between Islam and tradition wasn't just a source of conflict, it was a catalyst for cultural creativity and political negotiation, shaping Mali's identity in complex and enduring ways. Under Mansa Musa's reign, the city of Timbuktu underwent a remarkable transformation from a modest trading outpost into a flourishing metropolis that would become synonymous with wealth, culture, and learning. Strategically located near the Niger River, Timbuktu was perfectly positioned to connect trans-Saharan trade routes with riverine commerce, making it a bustling hub for merchants and scholars alike. Musa's investments in infrastructure and institutions played a huge role in this rise. He funded the construction of mosques, schools, and libraries that attracted scholars from across the Islamic world. These institutions weren't just decorative, they were centers for religious study, science, law, and philosophy. Students flocked to Timbuktu to learn Arabic, study the Quran, and debate ideas in packed lecture halls. One quirky fact is that despite its reputation for religious scholarship, Timbuktu was also known for vibrant marketplaces, where merchants sold everything from gold and salt to exotic goods like ostrich feathers and leopard skins. It was a city where intellectual and commercial life mingled freely. Historians still argue about the extent to which Timbuktu was a city of ordinary people versus an elite scholarly enclave. Some evidence suggests it was home to a diverse population including farmers, artisans, and traders, while others emphasize its role as an intellectual capital. The city's libraries housed tens of thousands of manuscripts, many handwritten by scholars who chronicled everything from astronomy to poetry. These texts were treasured and carefully preserved, showing Mali's commitment to knowledge preservation. Timbuktu's reputation spread far and wide, even reaching European maps, where it was often depicted as a mythical city of gold. while the reality was more complex. The city's importance as a cultural and economic center was undeniable. The flourishing of Timbuktu under Musa also fostered a unique cultural identity that blended African traditions with Islamic influences, creating a legacy that still resonates today. So Timbuktu's rise was more than just an urban success story. It was a symbol of Mali's golden age, where trade, scholarship and faith came together to create a truly remarkable city. Mansa Musa's generosity wasn't just a one-time display during his pilgrimage, it was a defining feature of his entire reign. Tales of his open-handedness spread far and wide, often sounding so grand they feel half myth, half history, but they all center around a ruler who seemed to believe that wealth only meant something if it could be shared. Throughout Mali, Musa made a habit of giving. Whether it was gold to scholars, food to travelers, or land to clerics. His generosity helped win loyalty and cement his reputation as a benevolent ruler. Musa didn't just hand out gold in far-off cities like Cairo. He was known for feeding the poor in Mali, financing the education of promising students, and even setting up community food reserves in case of famine. One particularly quirky story involves Musa giving away so much gold in Cairo that local metalworkers struggled to find buyers for their wares afterward. The market was so saturated that even flashy trinkets lost their charm for a while. Imagine larking into a store where everything is gold, and everyone else already has 3 of them. His gifts were often strategic. Giving a village a mosque or funding a school wasn't just kindness, it was policy. These acts of generosity strengthened local governance, promoted Islam, and wove Mali's vast territories more tightly together. Historians still argue over whether Musa's giving created long-term economic imbalances or inspired a more charitable culture among Mali's elite. Some suggest his style of leadership helped shape West African political ideals, where rulers were expected not just to rule, but to give. Diplomatically, Musa's generosity was a golden ticket. Visitors left with gifts and tales that reached Europe and Asia. Mali's image as a land of wealth and wisdom spread, in part, because of how freely Musa shared both. But Musa's generosity wasn't blind spending. He supported things that lasted: buildings, books, institutions. He wasn't just tossing coins in the air, he was investing in a legacy, and judging by the fact that we're still talking about him, it worked. So, whether it was gold in Cairo, grain in Timbuktu, or education across the empire, Mansa Musa's legendary generosity wasn't just a historical footnote, it was the heart of his rule. With all the gold Mansa Musa gave away, and all the wealth Mali accumulated over decades, it's no surprise that legends began to swirl about vast hidden treasures, secret vaults, and lost cities still glinting beneath the sands. These stories, part history and part bedtime fantasy, have kept treasure hunters and daydreamers busy for centuries. One popular legend tells of a hidden chamber beneath Timbuktu, supposedly filled with chests of gold bars, scrolls, and sacred relics. According to the tale, only Musa knew its true location, and he took the secret to his grave. Some even claim it's protected by ancient traps or spiritual guardians. Think Indiana Jones, but with more mud brick and less Hollywood glitter. There's another persistent myth about a caravan Musa sent into the deep Sahara, intended to establish trade with a far-off land. The caravan allegedly vanished, and its treasure, camels, gold, goods, was swallowed by the dune. Historians still argue whether this is entirely fictional or based on a real expedition that went awry. No one has found proof, but that hasn't stopped the search. A quirky twist to some of these stories. They say that occasional gold coins turn up in desert villages, unmarked and unlike anything known from that period, fueling whispers of a still-lost hoard waiting to be uncovered. While most scholars believe that if there was a lost treasure, it was likely dispersed, spent or melted down over time, the appeal of a hidden fortune remains strong. People want to believe there's still something glittering just beneath the surface, perhaps a buried palace, a sealed library, or a collapsed warehouse full of gold dust. Interestingly, European explorers in the 18th and 19th centuries were obsessed with finding these mythical riches. Many arrived in West Africa driven by stories that traced back to Musa's era, only to find that the real treasure was cultural, not something they could stuff in a trunk and sail home with. So, are the stories of lost Musa treasure real? Maybe. Maybe not. But they live on, partly because the idea of hidden wealth is just too delicious to let go. And in a way, Mansa Musa's greatest treasure might not be gold at all, but the tales he left behind, still shining in the minds of curious dreamers. Mali's power didn't just come from gold, it came from how that gold moved. Under Mansa Musa, the empire's trade networks were some of the most advanced of their time, stretching across deserts, savannas, and forests, reaching into Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. If you could imagine an ancient version of international shipping lanes, Mali was smack in the middle of it all. At the heart of these networks were caravans, massive, slow-moving trains of camels and donkeys carrying goods across the Sahara. These weren't quick weekend trips. A single journey from Timbuktu to Cairo could take months, braving scorching heat, dust storms, and the occasional bandit. But the payoff, huge. Traders returned with textiles, books, horses, glassware, and spices. In return, they carried Mali's most famous exports: gold, salt, ivory, and even cola nuts. Yes, the same plant that helped inspire cola drinks. One quirky tidbit: cola nuts were so prized for their bitter, caffeine-like effect that they were sometimes traded like money. A little brown nut that could fuel a long desert journey. Who knew? Mali's access to both the Sahara and the Niger River made it a super connector. Goods could come down from North Africa by land and move through West Africa by boat. Ports and markets bustled with activity. Cities like Gao, Walata, and Jenne were packed with merchants haggling over prices and sipping tea in shaded courtyards while deals were made. These trade routes also moved ideas. Islam, science, and art traveled alongside salt blocks and gold coins. Musa's promotion of education and religion meant that goods and knowledge traveled together, often hand in hand. Historians still argue whether these trade routes made Mali dependent on foreign markets, or simply integrated it into a global economy on its own terms. What's clear is that trade brought influence. Rulers from as far as Morocco and Andalusia sent envoys to Mali. Mali's diplomats were known in Cairo and Baghdad. Interestingly, Mali even had indirect contact with Europe. Italian and Catalan mapmakers placed Mali prominently on their charts after Musa's pilgrimage, sometimes drawing him holding a golden orb, kind of like a medieval endorsement deal. And merchants in Genoa and Venice definitely knew of Mali, even if they couldn't always find it. So, trade wasn't just a way to move goods, it was a lifeline that connected Mali to the world. Mansa Musa knew this. He built his empire not just on gold, but on the roads that carried it, the people who traded it, and the ideas that came back in return. Mali's rise as a cultural and intellectual force under Mansa Musa also sparked a flurry of scholarly activity, and with that, debate. The empire's cities, especially Timbuktu, became places where not everyone agreed. Far from being quiet libraries full of nodding scholars, these centers buzzed with disagreements on everything from theology to astronomy to whether the stars had any influence on human behavior. Spoiler: medieval scholars were split. One of the most vibrant academic arenas was Islamic jurisprudence. Scholars in Mali debated how closely Islamic law, or Sharia, should align with local customs. Should traditional inheritance practices be kept, or replaced with Islamic rules? Could tribal rituals be tolerated if they didn't contradict scripture? These weren't abstract arguments, they shaped daily life. Historians still argue about how much influence these scholarly debates had on policy, but there's no doubt they mattered. A quirky scholarly footnote: some records describe arguments lasting days, with scholars taking turns in public debates that drew curious crowds. Picture a heated TED Talk but with robes, handwritten notes, and the occasional goat wandering through the audience. Beyond law, scholars delved into mathematics, medicine, grammar, and history. Manuscripts from this era often include margin notes, where later scholars argued with the original authors, sometimes quite sassily. In one astronomy text, a scholar scrawled that the writer clearly didn't observe the sky long enough. Academic shade, medieval edition. These intellectual debates weren't limited to Malians. Scholars from Egypt, Morocco, and even Persia visited, bringing their own perspectives. This influx of ideas kept Mali from becoming an intellectual echo chamber. The constant push and pull of different worldviews kept scholarship alive and evolving. Interestingly, some scholars in Mali began developing their own interpretations of Islam that blended local traditions with orthodox teachings. While purists raised eyebrows, these new interpretations helped make Islam feel more rooted in West African soil. It's an open question whether this adaptability made Islam stronger in the region or diluted it. The debate continues. So, behind Mali's golden reputation was a humming network of ideas, messy, passionate, and often contradictory, but that's what made it special. It wasn't a museum of knowledge, it was a marketplace of minds. Even golden ages have their sunsets, and for Mali, the decline began not long after Mansa Musa's death. It didn't happen overnight. There was no dramatic fall, no single battle that toppled the empire. But slowly, the forces that held the vast kingdom together began to loosen. Musa's immediate successors struggled to maintain the same level of control and vision. His son, Makanda I, inherited the throne, but lacked the political and administrative savvy of his father. Mali was like a huge, intricate clock built by a master, and without the same level of care, its gears began to grind out of sync. One key challenge was Mali's sheer size. The empire had grown so vast under Musa that governing it became increasingly difficult. Local governors, once loyal, started acting more independently. Some stopped sending full tributes to the capital. Others began to eye the throne for themselves. Historians still argue whether Mali's sole structure was inherently too fragile to sustain an empire that big, or whether it just needed another ruler with Musa's charisma and discipline. Trade patterns also shifted. The once thriving trans-Saharan routes began facing new competition, as coastal trade along West Africa picked up. European ships started appearing along the Atlantic coast, eager to bypass desert routes and trade directly. Mali, landlocked and desert-wrapped, was at a disadvantage. Gold still flowed, but the economic tide was turning elsewhere. A quirky sign of decline. Oral traditions mention that some of Mali's outlying provinces began minting their own coins, often with sloppy designs or odd symbols. It was like a visual shrug, a way of saying we're kinda doing our own thing now. Add to this environmental pressures. The land began to dry. Farming became harder, and desertification pushed people south. Internal unrest grew. Rival kingdoms, like the Songhai Empire, began gaining strength and chipping away at Mali's borders. Timbuktu, once the jewel of Musa's reign, remained a cultural center, but even it felt the strain. Patronage declined, and some scholars moved elsewhere, following wealth and opportunity. So, while Mali didn't fall with a crash, it faded. It dimmed, and over generations the shimmering empire that Musa built became a legend, still whispered in markets and sung in stories, but no longer the great power it once was. Even as Mali's political strength waned, the impact of Mansa Musa's reign echoed across Africa. His legacy wasn't just gold or buildings, it was the profound influence his empire had on neighboring regions, reshaping how kingdoms governed, traded, and engaged with the broader world. Mali had shown that a sub-Saharan African state could rival the great powers of the Islamic and European worlds. Musa's example inspired neighboring rulers from the forested kingdoms of the south to the Sahelian states of the east to adopt similar models of leadership, blending local customs with Islamic governance. For example, the emerging Songhai Empire, which would eventually surpass Mali, borrowed heavily from Musa's playbook: a strong central government, support for Islamic scholarship, and control of vital trade routes. Historians still debate how much Songhai's rulers directly learned from Musa versus just adapting to the same environment, but the similarities are hard to ignore. A quirky detail: some West African kings after Musa adopted titles and court rituals that mimicked his, right down to ceremonial gold staffs and elaborately robed processions. Imitation, it turns out, was the sincerest form of flattery, especially when it came with gold accessories. Musa also influenced African diplomacy. His legendary pilgrimage set a precedent for rulers using international travel, not just as a spiritual journey, but as a public relations masterstroke. Other leaders began forging ties with North Africa and the Middle East. hoping to gain the same respect and trade benefits that Musa had enjoyed. Perhaps more importantly, his support for learning and the arts became a lasting model. Mali's intellectual institutions continued to operate for centuries, shaping religious and legal practices across the region. Some text written during or just after Musa's reign traveled far beyond Mali, influencing Islamic scholarship throughout West Africa. His reign also reinforced the idea that African kingdoms could be not just participants but leaders in the global exchange of ideas, goods, and beliefs. That's a legacy that stretched far beyond borders or centuries. So, while Mali's power eventually faded, Musa's influence did not. It lived on in the empires that followed, the scholars who studied his model, and the very idea that greatness could rise from the heart of West Africa. Gold made Mansa Musa famous, but the ripple effects of his glittering wealth may have gone further than anyone in his time could have imagined. Some historians believe his extravagant displays and the sheer volume of gold he brought into circulation may have played a subtle role in nudging parts of the world toward new economic ideas, including the early seeds of what would one day become the global gold standard. Now, let's be clear, Musa didn't invent the idea of gold-backed currency, and he certainly wasn't writing economic policy for Europe. But when a man shows up with more gold than an entire continent is used to seeing, people take notice. Musa's gold, flowing into Cairo, Mecca, and beyond, changed perceptions about the global supply of this precious metal. And where perceptions go, markets often follow. A quirky historical aside, some European maps from the 14th century actually show a crowned African king, holding a golden orb labeled something like Rex Aurum, the king of gold. He was basically medieval financial marketing. Historians still argue whether European monarchs later tightened their own gold reserves and coinage systems because of this influx, or if it simply highlighted a new, unexpected source of wealth. In cities like Venice, Genoa, and Seville, traders began talking about the West African goldfields with almost mythical reverence. Banks and merchants became increasingly interested in stable currency and standardized coins. Gold, after all, was reliable. It didn't rust, spoil, or get eaten by goats. The more of it there was, the more critical it became to control it properly. Some scholars believe that Mali's gold helped Europe recover from economic stagnation in the early 1300s. Others caution that the gold's true impact is impossible to measure and likely overstated in legend. But one thing is clear, Musa's journey made people rethink how wealth moved and who controlled it. Even centuries later, when European powers began exploring and colonizing West Africa, many did so with one goal in mind: to find the source of all that gold. The myth of untapped riches drove explorers, traders, and fortunately conquerors. That's a legacy Musa never intended, but one that followed his gold trails all the same. So, while Mansa Musa may not have drawn the blueprints for the global gold standard, his lavish use of gold helped cement its value in the minds of bankers, rulers, and traders across continents, making Mali a glowing, golden chapter in the early story of global finance. Centuries after Mansa Musa's reign, the sands of West Africa still whisper his name. And now, archaeologists are finally listening. In recent decades, excavations across Mali and its neighboring regions have begun to uncover physical traces of the empire he built. From crumbling city walls to hidden manuscript troves, each discovery adds another layer to the story of a kingdom that once dazzled the world. One of the most exciting finds has been the rediscovery and preservation of ancient libraries in Timbuktu. Hidden for centuries, thousands of handwritten manuscripts, many dating back to Musa's era, were found tucked away in family homes, old trunks, and earthen jars. These texts, written in Arabic and African languages, cover everything from astronomy to law, medicine to poetry. Some were even buried during times of conflict to protect them. Imagine discovering a 1,000-year-old handwritten astronomy book in your grandma's attic. Same energy. Archaeologists have also mapped old city layouts using satellite imagery and drone surveys, revealing the impressive scale of cities like Gao and Niani. These urban centers were carefully planned, with wide roads, market spaces, and religious buildings. Historians still debate whether Niani, often cited as Mali's capital under Musa, was a single fixed city or a cluster of royal compounds that moved with the court. A quirky twist. Some archaeological digs have unearthed copper coins from North Africa in Mali's ancient marketplaces, showing just how far trade extended. It's a bit like finding a euro in a medieval American settlement, proof of contact across a surprisingly large world. There have also been discoveries of ancient pottery styles and building materials that suggest cross-cultural influence. Decorative techniques from Mali appear in North African artifacts, and vice versa, showing a blending of artistic traditions sparked by trade and shared religion. Still, Mali's dry climate and political instability have made excavation difficult. Many sites remain unexplored, and some are at risk of erosion or looting. Efforts are underway to digitally preserve manuscripts and restore damaged structures before they disappear entirely. So, while we can never travel back to Musa's Mali, archaeology is giving us the next best thing, a glimpse beneath the dust, where gold glimmers less brightly than old knowledge, quietly waiting to be read, restored and remembered. For someone so larger than life, Mansa Musa's final days are oddly quiet in the historical record. Unlike his grand pilgrimage or legendary wealth, his death is shrouded in mystery. No elaborate chronicles, no towering mausoleum, just scattered hints and a few whispers from centuries-old texts. Most scholars agree that Musa died sometime around 3037, but even that date isn't certain. Some Arabic sources list his successor, Makan I, as ruling by that year, implying Musa had passed. Others suggest he may have died earlier, but remained symbolically king while transitioning power. Historians still argue over the exact timeline, with some proposing that Musa may have abdicated before his death, a rare move for a monarch of his stature. As for how he died, silence. No dramatic battlefield exit, no sudden illness recorded in glowing script. This absence leads to speculation. Was it a peaceful passing in his palace, surrounded by scholars and advisors, or perhaps a quiet retreat into religious devotion near the end, away from the throne he had so brilliantly occupied? One quirky tale from oral tradition hints that Musa disappeared on a final spiritual journey, possibly retreating to a remote part of the empire for prayer and solitude, never to return. Think of it as the medieval version of a king going off the grid, permanently. Another theory suggests that his death was intentionally kept low-key to maintain political stability. After all, the sudden loss of such a powerful figure could have created panic or encouraged rebellion. By easing the transition with little fanfare, Mali may have avoided a crisis. What's particularly interesting is the lack of a known grand tomb. While some believe he was buried in or near Niamey, Mali's former capital, no confirmed burial site has been found. The sands of time have likely covered it, both literally and metaphorically. Despite the mystery, Musa's legacy didn't fade with his final breath. His policies, constructions, and educational reforms endured, but the absence of a clear death narrative adds to his legend, like a star that burns so brightly it simply vanishes, leaving others to debate where it went. So while the richest man in history may have exited the world without spectacle, he left behind something far more enduring than ceremony, an empire still glowing with the light he cast. Even centuries after Mali's political decline and Mansa Musa's mysterious departure, the legacy of his empire continues to echo, not just in academic papers or dusty scrolls, but in the everyday life and culture of West Africa. From music and language to architecture and storytelling, Mali's influence is everywhere, often more quietly powerful than the gold that made it famous. Take the griots, for example, oral historians and musicians whose job it is to preserve and pass down the stories of the past. Griots have kept the memory of Mansa Musa alive, in songs, poems, and tales told around fires and village gatherings. To this day, children in parts of Mali grow up hearing stories of the generous king whose camels carried cities worth of gold and whose wisdom shaped a mighty nation. One quirky detail: some griots claim to be descendants of Musa's court entertainers, a living chain of memory stretching back 700 years. The architectural influence of Musa's mosque-building efforts can still be seen in towns like Timbuktu and Djenné, where the distinctive mud brick style has endured. Annual replastering festivals turn maintenance into community celebrations, part religious duty, part neighborhood party. Culturally, the emphasis Musa placed on education and literacy has also had staying power. West Africa today still has pockets of intense manuscript preservation and Islamic scholarship, especially in Mali, Niger, and Mauritania. Families proudly guard handwritten texts passed down over generations, some originating from the intellectual heyday, sparked by Musa's pilgrimage. Historians still argue how directly today's institutions descend from Musa's time, but the ideological line is strong, a belief in education as a public good, in rulers as stewards of both wealth and knowledge. Mali's legacy also lives in symbols. The name Mansa Musa itself has become a kind of shorthand for African greatness and untapped potential. He's featured in hip-hop lyrics, museum exhibits, and digital artwork, often framed as proof that Africa had, and still has, civilizations to be proud of. So while the empire may have crumbled, its cultural DNA endures. In a griot's verse, a mosque's shadow, or a child's lesson about a king who gave away gold like sand, the spirit of Mansa Musa and the Mali Empire lives on, not in stone, but in story. The legend of Mansa Musa didn't end with the last gold coin or the final echo of camel hooves in the sand. In many ways, his story only grew after his death, transforming into something larger than history, something closer to myth. Over time, the memory of his wealth, his pilgrimage, and his shimmering empire wove itself into the fabric of folklore and fantasy, both in Africa and far beyond. In medieval Europe, mapmakers who had never set foot in Africa placed a golden-robed king on their charts, usually labeled Musa, or simply King of Mali, holding a gleaming nugget, like it was a divine artifact. These weren't just drawings, they were declarations. Mali, thanks to Musa, was recognized as a place of staggering wealth and global relevance. Over the centuries, Mansa Musa has become a kind of time-traveling symbol, used by Pan-African movements, Afrocentric scholars, and even pop culture artists. He's been turned into graphic novels, mentioned in rap lyrics, and held up as proof that African greatness didn't start with colonial borders, but had already been dazzling the world centuries earlier. One quirky example: during the 1970s, several African leaders referenced Musa in speeches as a model of economic independence and cultural pride. One even proposed renaming a government building after him, though the proposal was, sadly, buried in bureaucracy. Some things never change. But here's the thing: historians still argue whether we've turned Mansa Musa into more of a symbol than a man. Was he truly the wealthiest person in human history? Possibly. Was he an enlightened ruler who blended faith, power, and generosity? Likely, but the very scale of his legend makes it hard to see the real figure behind the gold. He's become a prism, reflecting whatever we hope to see: a powerful African monarch, a cautionary tale about wealth, or a visionary who built a golden empire from the dust. And yet, that's part of his magic. He is history's whisper in gold dust, the memory carried by desert winds and old songs, a name too bright to ever fade completely. And now, as we step gently away from the golden shadows of Mansa Musa's world, let the desert quiet return. The camels are long gone, the markets have closed, the scrolls are back in their cases, the soft crackle of ancient parchment gives way to the rustle of night. Imagine the last flickers of torchlight in a mud-walled mosque, flickering across the sand-colored bricks, the soft hum of prayer lingering in the air. Outside, the stars stretch wide across the Malian sky, the same ones that watched over Musa's final breath, and still shine quietly over Timbuktu's sleeping rooftops. His story, woven through gold trails and whispered by griots, is now yours to carry. And whether you picture him seated on a golden throne or walking barefoot through the desert in prayer, know that his empire left behind more than ruins. It left echoes of wisdom, resilience, and wonder. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts float gently, like dust settling after a caravan has passed. There is nothing left to do tonight. The road is behind you, the journey complete. You've walked through time, across sands, through courts of gold and mosques of silence. You've wandered through knowledge, generosity, and legend. And now, sleep is calling, soft and slow, like a river moving through dusk.